The stage was set for what many were calling one of the most anticipated political clashes of the year. The venue, a gleaming studio in Manhattan, was filled with the hum of television cameras and the low murmur of a restless audience. At center stage stood two men whose political ideologies could not have been further apart: Senator JD Vance of Ohio and Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani of New York. The network had billed the event as the future of America's economy, a debate. But it was clear from the start that the night was going to be about far more than policy. This was about style, conviction, and who could seize control of the national narrative. Mamdani, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, exuded confidence. A rising figure among progressives, he had made his name by railing against what he saw as corporate greed, economic inequality, and America's unwillingness to embrace democratic socialism. To his supporters, he was a fresh, bold voice in a political world dominated by compromise and caution. To his critics, he was naive, idealistic, and dangerously inexperienced. J.D. Vance, by contrast, carried himself with a quieter authority. The author-turned-senator had already proven himself as a heavyweight debater, unafraid of confrontation and adept at dismantling opponents with sharp precision. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. His strategy was simple. Let his opponents talk, wait for the moment they overextended, and then deliver a single, devastating blow. As the cameras rolled, the moderator welcomed the audience and laid out the ground rules. Each participant would have opening remarks, followed by questions from the panel and opportunities for direct rebuttal. Mamdani went first, and he launched into his vision with vigor. His words poured out like a flood, polished and impassioned. He spoke of a New York where rent was affordable, a country where healthcare was a human right, and a future where corporations paid their fair share. He cited statistics on rising inequality, painted vivid pictures of struggling families, and positioned himself as the champion of the working class against what he called a system rigged for the wealthy few. Applause broke out in the studio, especially from younger attendees who had followed Mamdani's career. Energized by their support, he leaned further into his rhetoric. The truth is simple, Mamdani declared, his voice ringing with conviction. We live in the wealthiest nation on earth, and yet millions of people struggle to pay rent, to buy groceries, to see a doctor. Why? Because corporations and billionaires hoard resources that belong to the people. If we are serious about justice, about dignity, about equality, then we must tax the wealthy and reinvest in our communities. Anything less is a betrayal of the American dream. He finished his statement to loud applause. For a moment, the energy in the room belonged entirely to him. He looked across the stage at J.D. Vance, clearly confident that he had set the tone. Vance did not interrupt. He did not shift in his seat. Instead, he let the applause die down, his face expressionless except for a faint, almost amused smile. When the moderator finally turned to him, Vance adjusted his microphone and began slowly, deliberately. Assemblyman Mamdani is right about one thing, he said. We do live in the wealthiest nation on earth. But the question is, how do we keep it that way? How do we ensure prosperity doesn't just exist for one generation but for the next? And how do we avoid the mistakes of countries that tried his brand of economic theory and ended up with widespread poverty instead of widespread opportunity? His tone was calm, but the room seemed to shift. Unlike Mamdani's impassioned appeals, Vance spoke with surgical precision. He referenced his own upbringing in a struggling Ohio town, noting that the promises of free everything always sounded good on paper but rarely helped families in practice. He reminded viewers that businesses, not government programs, were the engines of jobs and innovation. The moderator pressed for a direct response to Mamdani's taxation plan. Vance leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on his opponent. He had been waiting for this. Assemblyman Mamdani, he said evenly, you've called for higher taxes on corporations and the wealthy to fund your programs. Let me ask you this. Can you name a single country, just one, in history that has successfully created long-term prosperity for working people by punishing the very businesses that employ them, without those businesses fleeing, shutting down, or raising prices on ordinary families? The question hit like a thunderclap. The studio, so loud just moments earlier, fell into an almost eerie silence. All eyes turned to Mamdani. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come immediately. For a man who had spoken so confidently just minutes before, the hesitation was glaring. He began to repeat familiar talking points about corporate accountability, about fairness, about justice. But none of it addressed the question directly. The examples he tried to allude to faltered under the weight of Vance's challenge. For the first time that evening, Mamdani looked rattled. And J.D. Vance, sensing blood in the water, didn't let go. The hesitation on Zohran Mamdani's face stretched into seconds, but on live television, seconds can feel like an eternity. The studio lights that had seemed energizing just moments earlier now felt unforgiving, almost accusatory. His supporters in the audience shifted in their seats, the applause that once fueled him now replaced by silence heavy enough to make the air itself seem tense. JD Vance hadn't just asked a question, he had sprung a trap. Mamdani had delivered passion, statistics, and slogans, but Vance had cut to the heart of the issue: proof, evidence, real-world examples. And without them, Mamdani was suddenly exposed. I think what you're missing, Senator, Mamdani began, his words slower now, is that corporations can and should be held accountable. We've seen nations invest in their people, in healthcare, in housing. But which one? Vance interjected smoothly, his voice calm but firm. Name the nation where your exact model succeeded without devastating consequences for workers. Venezuela tried it. The Soviet Union tried it. Even parts of Western Europe are struggling under the weight of overtaxation. So which country proves your point? The interruption wasn't hostile, it was surgical. Vance wasn't shouting, wasn't grandstanding. He was simply holding the assemblyman to his own standard. And Mamdani had nothing. The audience reacted before Mamdani could finish fumbling for words. Some gasped. Others let out nervous laughter. A few of his supporters clapped half-heartedly, trying to salvage momentum, but the energy in the room had shifted entirely. The camera panned briefly to the moderator, whose raised eyebrows said everything. This was no longer a fair fight. Mamdani tried to recover, throwing out lines about Scandinavian countries, but Vance was ready. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, those nations all rely on robust private enterprise and global trade to pay for their social programs. They encourage business, not punish it. They don't crush their job creators with taxes, they partner with them. That's the part you always leave out, Assemblyman. The blow landed hard. Even viewers at home, watching from their living rooms, could sense it. Social media lit up instantly. Clips of Mamdani stammering under Vance's question began circulating before the debate had even ended. On Twitter, conservative commentators declared victory. Vance just destroyed Mamdani in one sentence. Memes popped up, showing Mamdani searching desperately through papers for an answer while Vance leaned back with a smirk. Hashtags like hashtag Vance crushes Mamdani and hashtag one question KO trended within minutes. Inside the studio, the moderator tried to move the conversation along, asking new questions about healthcare and trade policy, but the tone had shifted irreversibly. Mamdani's answers, though still delivered with passion, seemed less confident, almost defensive. Every time he spoke, the audience seemed to be waiting for Vance to deliver another devastating counterpunch. And he did, several times. When Mamdani argued for universal rent control, Vance asked, what happens when landlords simply stop building apartments? Do you think housing shortages magically disappear? When Mamdani insisted on raising corporate taxes, Vance calmly pointed out, New York already has businesses fleeing to Texas and Florida. Do you want the entire country to follow suit? Each exchange left Mamdani more flustered, his rhythm broken. Each rebuttal from Vance felt like another nail in the coffin. By the time closing statements arrived, the contrast was glaring. Mamdani delivered a fiery, emotional plea, speaking of justice, equality, and the moral duty of government. But his earlier stumble lingered in the air. The passion now sounded like desperation. Vance, on the other hand, ended with quiet authority. We all want a country where working families thrive, he said. But slogans won't get us there. Prosperity doesn't come from punishing success, it comes from creating opportunities for everyone to succeed. Assemblyman Mamdani offers theories. I offer results. The applause that followed was thunderous, louder than any Mamdani had received all night. The camera captured his faint smile as if he already knew the headlines waiting for him in the morning. And the headlines did not disappoint. New York Times, Mamdani stumbles in clash with Vance. Fox News, Vance silences socialist assemblyman with one simple question. Politico, JD Vance dominates televised debate, Mamdani left without an answer. The next day, even progressive outlets struggled to spin the encounter. Some tried to argue that Mamdani had been ambushed, that Vance had oversimplified complex issues. But the viral clips told a different story. People didn't see nuance, they saw a confident senator dismantle a rising progressive star with precision and poise. In Brooklyn coffee shops, Mamdani's supporters defended him passionately, saying he was brave to stand on that stage at all. But behind closed doors, even some of his allies admitted the debate had been a disaster. Meanwhile, conservative donors and strategists celebrated Vance's performance, calling it a defining moment for his national profile. The most telling reaction, however, came from ordinary voters interviewed on the street. "I don't agree with everything JD Vance says," one independent voter told a reporter, "but man, that guy came prepared. The other one just looked like he didn't know what he was talking about." And that was the lasting impression. For all Mamdani's passion, all his fiery rhetoric, all his carefully prepared statistics, the debate boiled down to one unanswered question, a question that cut through theory and landed squarely in reality. JD Vance hadn't just won the debate. He had defined it.